Please be advised, this podcast contains strong language. Enjoy.
Hello and welcome to It's Football, Not Football. This is our new podcast idea that we've come up with. I'm Dan Gadsden and I'm joined by Josh Reynolds.
How are we doing?
And Ieuan Evans.
You all right, lads?
And basically the idea of this podcast is we're going to be covering off American football, as we call it here over in the UK, and more traditional football. And we're going to alternate week by week, looking into talking about the events that have happened in college football and the NFL, and looking back towards domestic football in the UK and looking at the Premier League and the likes. So this week's episode, looking into doing a bit of a recap of the 2020 NFL draft, and also mainly taking a bit more of a deeper dive into it, looking at our teams. As a Seahawks fan, we're going to be looking at a breakdown of how the Seahawks drafted, as well as
The Shithawks.
as well as looking into Josh's Steelers and Ieuan's Raiders. So, gents, I guess we crack on really with it. Round one, NFL draft, pick number one, thoughts?
I mean, Joe, I think it's the obvious pick, isn't it? I think if you look at his 2019 season stats, don't think you could argue that there's never been a better college final year. 76.3% pass completion, over 5,500 yards, over 10 yards per average per throw, 60 touchdowns, just 6 interceptions. The only thing I worry about is, as we brought up before, is it's one season.
Yeah.
At LSU, and whether he can actually continue that. But I think anybody would have taken Joe Burrow on. I think if you'd have rewound a year ago, where everyone was sucking off Tua, everyone would have gone for Tua, wouldn't they? Because it's Tua. I think if any of us were in the Bengals GM chair, I think we would have made the exact same pick.
Yeah, he's pretty much prototype as well, really. There's nothing really to add. I mean, like you said, the stats speak for themselves, and I think it's just a bit obvious. Obviously, Tua had his injury as well. I'm not sure if it'd be much different if Tua was 100% fit and got to, play a bit more this year. But as it stands, I think Joe Burrow was easily number one. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. You've mentioned it yourself, really. He's a prototypical guy who put up big stats. It's usually a recipe to be the number one pick in the draft. And I guess, you talk about prototypes. No surprises again, really, with Chase Young. Ohio State has got this knack now of producing unbelievable pass rushes.
Mm-hmm.
So absolutely no surprise with the second pick. And Ohio State, Jeff Okudah with the third pick as well. Ohio State are producing unbelievable pro-ready prospects at the moment. I think those top three picks seem nail on for a while, actually.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they've let Slay's gone now. I mean, Jeff Okudah just stepping in. I mean, I'm not a big fan of letting cornerbacks just step in. I know plenty have done it.
Unless they're Ieuan Evans, coming in. No football experience.
Yeah, just a brick baller. As a Steelers fan, we've had plenty that have come in and, we've started them straight away and they've just not looked the part and it's all gone downhill. But you can't ask for much more from him.
You say that, though. They had Trufant come in, didn't they? He's obviously a vet.
So Trufant he's not always 100% fit.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure most people base their analysis of him or their judgment of him on that 1 year. Well, it might be 2, actually. I take it back. That might be a bit harsh saying 1. But, last year was decent as well. I think he had 4 picks last year. Yeah, I don't know. The year before, he didn't have a pick. He had a lot more tackles, played a lot more football, but not turnovers. And turnovers, in my opinion, is what you look for in your corners, to be honest.
Yeah, I think they've taken a guy in Okudah that doesn't necessarily have a great college record of production in terms of turnover, but understanding he's an elite defensive back in terms of the way he covered, the lack of poor discipline, but the fact he was actually a very disciplined player with very few penalties. You're getting a guy that's going to come in and produce in terms of locking people down. But you're right, it's an interesting one that theoretically both of their corners are guys that don't necessarily have high production in the last couple of years, like Ieuan Evans.
Ieuan Evans, mate, he transformed that form of Bobcats team single-handedly. Wasn't that? No, I'm taking piss. What I would say, though, is obviously you had Ron Rivera come in at the Redskins, take Chase Young off the board, who is a guy that you would think everything he stands for, a big, powerful defense that scares you up front. Arguably, I would have traded. I wouldn't have traded Chase Young. I wouldn't have traded the 2 pick for Chase Young, but I think I would have traded Jeff Okudah's pick at 3. I know Make a Play Slay obviously was traded away, which I think was a poor bit of business anyway. I think as we've discussed on numerous occasions, I think if you have got an absolutely great cornerback in this league, you need to do everything you can to keep hold of him.
100%.
Big Patriots philosophy. He's a great coach, obviously Bill Belichick, but he pays corners because he knows what corners are worth. Like Stephon Gilmore, Defensive Player of the Year last year, is an unbelievable.
That I don't want to talk about.
Right, another time, Reynolds. Another time. But you pay corners, and I just don't think when you get a corner that's as good as that, you trade them away. And like you said, Reynolds, I think with cornerbacks, they very, very rarely are they good enough to be instant starters. And I just think taking a corner at 3 when a lot of teams would have traded up. Well, I say we don't know, do we? We don't know who would have traded up. But I'm assuming in a draft where so many teams needed a quarterback, I think they probably had offers for that number 3 pick. And if I'm sitting there at 3 and I get either the Dolphins or the Chargers phone me, I'm trading back to accumulate more picks in the hope that either Jeff Okudah is still there and I get draft capital. But yeah, I thought we watched it together, didn't we, Dan? And I thought we were both expecting a trade earlier on than when the first one came.
Yeah, well, I think what's a really interesting point to make here, actually, is there was a lot of rumours in the build-up, wasn't there, that the Dolphins were looking to move up to 3 and they were looking to take an offensive tackle. And it sort of segues quite nicely into this 4th pick that it was supposedly Andrew Thomas was the guy they wanted and had the understanding that New York were going to take him at 4 if he was there. Now, surprise for me, straight away, we were talking about winners and losers, shocks and steals before we came on today. And this was a shock for me. I must be completely honest. Thomas was definitely in that top 4 offensive tackles in my eyes coming into this draft. I did not have him as the best tackle on the board. I personally had Wirfs as my favourite tackle.
But even if you have him Wirfs at your best tackle, but he still ended up going 4th out of the guys that were available.
Yeah, it's a really. I think Mekhi Becton was the guy that was a lot of people talking about in terms of ceiling, and it wouldn't have surprised me if he'd have gone ahead of Wirfs. But it's interesting. It's really, really interesting to see that actually there probably was a market for the Lions to trade down, and they could have traded down to as soon as 5 and probably got the same guy if rumours are to be believed. But speaking of 5, Tua Tagovailoa,
great pick.
I love the pick.
Same.
I think I was terrified coming into this draft, especially due to the lack of sort of workouts and physicals that teams could host, that Tua would fall. He didn't fall. Dolphins probably, and I say probably because you never know about longevity, but they've probably got their guy for the next 12, 14 years.
You're right. Josh Rosen is going to really perform with Tua behind him. I think. No, all jokes aside, I think the Dolphins smashed it. I think, as you said, there was a lot of talk about the Dolphins training up, whether it was a smoke screen or what, whether it was to get a tackle, whether it was they're going to go ahead and get their guy Tua. But at the end of the day, they got the guy that they were going to go for. There was this tank for Tua, obviously, all of last season, which they hated. But whether they were tanking for Tua or not, they still got the guy that they always wanted, and apparently that all their backroom staff wanted without having to trade up or get rid of any other draft capital. So I think they smashed it. And they still got a tackle later in the draft, which they've got to protect their new stud QB.
Well, I think Miami are just looking at Miami's draft as a whole, I think they've done a solid job. And I think it's definitely going to be exciting seeing them, have a good glow up in 2020-21. So
you say that though, in my head, I know your missus is obviously a Dolphins fan, Dan, but I can just never picture the Dolphins being good. I think obviously they can be good, but in your head where you just think it's like hearing now Sunderland in football. Yeah, Sunderland could sign Neymar, and you'd still think,
but it's still something.
Yeah,
it's an unbelievable point. I think the problem is the Dolphins have been such a mediocre franchise, especially since I started really getting into the game
last year.
They had which was about 3 weeks ago. But I think the issue that you've got really is they've had a couple of playoff runs. They've now got a really good coach. They've got, we'll talk about it a little bit more in detail. They had a brilliant draft here. They're a really exciting franchise on the up, which feels bizarre for a franchise that I've gotten quite used to being mediocre.
Yeah. Going on to the next bit then, Justin Herbert. How do you think he relates to Tua? Do you think the Chargers always had the mindset, whoever's left there at that time, we are going to go for? Definitely. Or do you think they were always set on Herbert?
Oh, I think they're one of their technical directors was quoted, wasn't he, the other day, as saying it didn't matter what quarterback fell to us, we were taking them. You know, they were so high on
don't
all
like
three
that.
guys. But
I don't like that either.
I completely agree. I think that's a little. We spoke about smoke screens. I think that's a smoke screen. I think they would have been really disappointed that Tua didn't fall to him. Understanding Herbert's got the better injury record, but I think there's a severe golfing class between a fit and healthy Burrow and Tua in comparison to Herbert. I think Herbert's prototypical, but I don't think he's shown necessarily the production which would suggest that he's going to translate to being a very good player in the NFL.
I do think people underrate Herbert's athleticism.
True, very true.
Massively.
And it's a nice fit with Tyrod Taylor there. You know, they've got that athletic guy that can throw the football, and they've just drafted an athletic guy that can throw the football. It's an interesting point.
Do you think either of them will be starting this season? Week 1?
No, Tua won't for sure, and I doubt Herbert will.
Yeah, I agree.
I think something's got to happen in pre-season to their guys, you know, Fitz and Tyrod, for there to be any eventuality. I think it's going to be a classic week 6, week 7, bit similar to how Jared Goff did it, where they've had that guy start the season, they're playing mediocre football, expectations are lower, bang, bring in the rookie, all the excitement builds. They've had 7-8 weeks to learn the offense effectively, and they come in and not necessarily dominate, but show that there's clearly a reason why they've drafted this guy early, and they have that short little uptick in form. They always say in the NFL, don't they? A lot of players say that, like, it's really disappointing sometimes when you draft that guy, he doesn't play for 6 weeks, the atmosphere in the dressing room is flat, and then the moment they start, and there's this big sort of boom in the culture internally. In terms of how they react.
But then I also think, imagine if you do that and then you bring him in and he flops.
Yeah,
I personally, if I'm the head coach of the Dolphins, I'm not playing Tua a single game this year.
I disagree with that. The only thing I'd say to that is, I'm not going to give you like 10 different examples, but when Baker was drafted, when Baker was drafted, a lot of people said he needs to sit a while, you know, let him learn the ropes and everything. I don't even think Tyrod got injured, or if Tyrod did get injured and then someone stepped in, but Baker ended up starting.
Got injured.
He
hurt his thumb,
and arguably Baker played his best football in that season by an absolute mile.
Yeah, it's before he got ad commercials and put on 4 stone, though. Have you seen him?
No, I don't disagree at all. The only thing I wanted to add as well to Justin Herbert stuff was Pac-12 players often get less recognition, and the only reason I say that is because of the timings. You know, Oregon, Stanford games when they play. I'm a Stanford fan in NCAA. They'd be playing at stupid o'clock in the morning for us, let alone in America. They'd be playing pretty late for them too. A lot of those guys, I'm not saying they don't get the right, fair, you know, evaluation on them, but sometimes they're overlooked. Sometimes these analysts and draft analysts are in bed when they're playing. Do you know what I mean? I just think that's worth acknowledging. I like Justin Herbert. I think a lot of QBs, these three QBs, I couldn't turn around and say he's going to be better than the other two based on what we've seen, but I would arguably say that he's definitely going to be up there with them. It might just take him a little bit longer. If
you had to predict now, though, both of you, 1, 2, 3, who's going to have the most successful NFL career? What order are you going?
Are we assuming that they stay completely fit?
Yeah, we're assuming that they're injury free.
Tua will have a Hall of Fame career. I think Joe Burrow is going to have a very good career, and I think Herbert will be a 6-7 year starter. If I had to give my honest assessment.
Yeah, I think that's relatively fair. I think I'd go same order, but I'd probably say Tua is the Dolphins, as exciting as it is for Dolphins right now. It's quite a young group of staff, I'm pretty sure, especially with the head coach, you know, and the early stages of these players' careers are quite important. So I don't know if the Dolphins will be going Super Bowl or even playoffs anytime soon. I could be wrong, don't get me wrong, but I'd go to Joe Burrow. He's in a tough division, especially, you know, you got Baker and Lamar as QBs in there, and the only way to kind of look at that is players get evaluated on how their teams do as well. It's not necessarily individual stats. So Joe Burrow's got big competition. The Steelers. Ben's maybe got 1 at most 2 years left. He might not even have that
Half
for
a
all we know
season.
at the moment.
Yeah.
Mason Rudolph definitely isn't the guy. Let's not talk about that. And then, like I said about Justin Herbert, I think he'll be up there with them. But I'd almost say it's like Big Ben, Eli, and Rivers. It's quite interesting where 2 of them have retired as well. Yeah. I think they'll all be up there, and I think Eli is Tua, Burrow is Ben, and Herbert is Rivers.
Do you not think QBs always get overhyped though? Like, think how many years we were watching the NFL. Every year QBs, and everyone assumes that they're just going to go on to have these amazing careers. It's probably the least successful conversion rate in positions. Like, how many QBs actually go on to do anything from college to the NFL?
Where they're picked, absolutely.
One of those 3 quarterbacks will flop.
Definitely.
I think.
If you had to say the most flop word, it's got to be Herbert, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree, and that's what I was going to say.
This is personal opinion, obviously, but.
I think Tua will have the most successful career. Hall of Famer. I think it's a stretch for anyone to say. Obviously, before they've had even a snap in the NFL, it's quite hard. But I can see he's the most likely to. The Tiger King, Joe Burrow. I just don't know if I see him as the guy. I think, and the only reason I say that is because it's, again, going back to the point, it's 1 season, and I think if you go into that offense, yeah, he's got targets in AJ Green. He's got Tyler Boyd there. Joe Mixon's still there, isn't he? But whether he performs as consistently as he should do, and again, going into that dressing room, he's got to be that leader. And I know in interviews, he's in the combine, everyone came out saying that Joe Burrow was the guy, but I don't know, before you actually see him take the field, you just don't know. And then Dalton, what's going to go on with Dalton?
He's a Patriot, mate. It's written in stars.
He is a Patriot. Yeah, I've been speaking to you about this since.
You've never said it before, mate. I don't know what you're on about.
You dare try and take this take away from me. This has been my take since probably week 2, week 3 of the regular season, which has been that Andy Dalton, in my eyes, is already in that Patriots jersey. He just is that Bill Belichick style. Hit the short routes effectively. Can occasionally throw a ball in a tight window in those sort of intermediate routes. He'll just fit the system as though Brady's never left, especially this late sort of career Brady that doesn't necessarily have the arm talent to hit the deep bomb every single time. But I guess it's probably a good time to sort of segue a little into the rest of the draft.
Yeah.
So 7, 8, and 9. The only shock here was that the Panthers didn't take Simmons. And I think that teed up the Cardinals. This is my opinion, obviously, but that's what teed up the Cardinals to take him, because Simmons had to be on their top 3 players in terms of big boards, best player available. He should have been on most teams' boards, in my eyes, anyway, in that top 3. He can play anywhere on that defense. I get the Panthers taking a defensive tackle, but they had almost that guy that can be your captain of your defense. Now that Kuechly's retired, is there, he's waiting for you, and you bypass him for a very, very good run defender. I thought that was pretty odd.
Yeah, I agree. I think if I'm the Cardinals GM and I'm sitting there and Simmons is still on the board when I'm making my pick, my laptop has risen from the table a good 3 inches. I think they never saw Simmons fall in that low. I think he was always going to go in the top 10. It was just how high in that top 10.
I like the accurate 3 inches there.
Yeah, being generous. I think, I don't know. I think, don't get me wrong, Derek Brown's a great player, great defensive tackle, and he's going to do a job in there. But as you say, they've lost Luke Kuechly, and I think they need another guy. The Panthers could have done with that guy, Isaiah Simmons, to step in and I think be the quarterback of the defense, that linebacker. And I think they're going to live to regret that.
Yeah, agreed.
No, the only thing I would say is I think the other thing, only being devil's advocate here, I do agree with what you're both saying, but one thing I did read that I do kind of agree with is run stoppers don't generate excitement. Isaiah Simmons, on the other hand, big explosive player, is a completely different comparison almost. These guys in the trenches don't necessarily...
What position did you play again?
Defensive tackle. But I'm talking NFL, NCAA here, obviously, not talking Brit Ball Division 2 football. But
you're jealous that Blue Eyes got more attention than you, aren't you? That's what this all boils down to. Blue Eyes at linebacker got more attention than you at defensive tackle.
Nah, he deserved every reward he got, but I'm just playing devil's advocate.
No, I think it's really true. Derek Brown reminds me of Vita Vea. He really does. That really big, like, bruising defensive tackle that's going to come in and dominate the run. He's not a penetrating defensive tackle. He's not going to get in the backfield and pressure you that way. He's going to pressure you by bull rushing your guards, centers, or what it may be. And I think it's a good fit. It's a very good fit. It's just I love Simmons. He's one of my favourite players in this year's draft.
Yeah.
And I was shocked on the night. But one pick that wasn't a shock was CJ Henderson.
See, I think you're wrong. I think Damon Arnett fell to the Raiders beautifully.
I mean, if I were the Jags here, I would have taken Damon Arnett. But I think CJ, big Gators fan, as you boys, I always fucking go on about him. But CJ's that guy that's going to come in and he can play lockdown corner defense. He's just not an elite tackler. And that's the reason that someone like Okuda's gone much higher than him. Is not only is Okuda a bit more refined in his technique, but he's also a guy that can actually sort of, for a corner, and I say this because we all know, like Ieuan Evans, corners can't tackle.
Controversial.
For a corner, Okuda is quite a good tackling corner.
Well, he got 35 tackles in his final season, Okuda.
Yeah, see, CJ Henderson picks and chooses. It was one of my only flaws about him as a Gator, was he sometimes picks and chooses when he wants to tackle. He's the sort of corner that if you can lay one on the running back or let the running back just sort of meander out of bounds for an extra 2-3 yards, he'll do it. And you'll see that a lot in the NFL. But you're getting a lockdown corner day one, in my eyes. I really like this pick. And if Okuda wasn't in the draft, he'd be the consensus first corner off the board also.
No, I agree. I think it's a great pick.
Yeah.
Obviously, they lost Jalen Ramsey last season, so it was always a position they needed to fill. I just think it made sense. Again, there's the argument that they could have gone quarterback here. But I genuinely think that they're waiting for next season's crop.
Definitely.
And we all know who's coming in, Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah. A great shout.
Agreed.
Next two picks, both teams very offensive tackle needy. Jedrick Wills went to the Browns from Alabama. Very steady day one starters, Wills. I really like him. I think it's a good pick. And I mentioned prior, Mekhi Becton going to the Jets. I love Mekhi Becton. I think he's got a massively high ceiling. But he's a guy that isn't necessarily going to have a good first season. I look at him a little bit like Laramie Tunsil. When he came out, everyone was really excited about Tunsil until his dad posted that ridiculous video on Twitter. But Tunsil was that guy that everyone's like, this guy's got a stupidly high season. He's just going to come in slightly unrefined. And I think that's Mekhi Becton.
That is the word, unrefined, because he is a beast.
Yeah.
And if someone can teach him, like obviously to NFL, coaching to NFL standard, he's arguably going to be the best tackle in this draft crop with the high ceiling that he does have.
I think just reflecting on the tackles as well is, so how many we got? We got 4 already gone.
Yeah.
In the top 11, I think it's a fair acknowledgement to say that one of those, maybe 2, are just not going to make it. I think offensive linemen are very hit and miss, just like you said with QBs.
Yeah. I think it's a great shout, and I think it relates a lot to why I think Andrew Thomas actually went first off to the Giants, because I think he's probably the safest offensive tackle in this draft in terms of, I think he's going to be maybe a 10-year starter at the offensive tackle position.
You think he's a safer pick than Tristan Wirfs?
I agree. Yeah, I do. And the reason I say that is because he's got everything NFL guys love. He's that massive, big frame. He's got that big impact on his first hit, but
he can read.
Yeah, he can read. He's got 10 fingers, fingers and 2 thumbs. But no, I think he's got all that sort of traits to succeed in the NFL, even if it is as just a regular starter. But you look at someone like Tristan Wirfs, it's ever so slightly undersized for an offensive tackle. That could have put teams off massively, but he's so explosive. That's why I loved him.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few tackles over the last couple of years that have come out a bit undersized. I think edge rushers are getting smaller, if anything. You're not seeing these huge guys coming down you every day.
Look at Max Crosby.
Yeah, Max Crosby is a bit of an anomaly.
Mate, but he's a Hall of Fame. No, I'm taking it.
Yeah, no bias there, but yeah, I think the undersized thing happens in every position, doesn't it? You get it in, wide receivers that aren't over 6 foot can't play on the outside, and QBs that aren't over 6 foot aren't going to do anything. It's a harsh judgment. I think these players still have the opportunity to do just as well as any of them. So
I think the NFL still hasn't had its Moneyball moment, if I'm completely honest. I still think so much of the NFL's draft picks are built up of he's the guy that scouts love, and you mentioned it perfectly. Everyone wants he's that good-looking guy, that quarterback. You want that really good-looking guy, unless you're like fucking Ben Roethlisberger, Jesus. But that big guy who
Looks don't play football, mate.
who can see over an offensive line. He's got that cannon of an arm. Do you know what I mean? You got all that sort of cliches. They're real cliches, and I think someone like Tristan Wirfs, whilst he's explosive, he's quite mean because he doesn't fit all the cliches. Whereas actually, someone like Andrew Thomas does fit those cliches. It sometimes really does influence on a draft strategy, especially if you can't work players out.
Yeah.
Well, they must have liked him to trade up to get him.
Definitely. Oh, definitely.
They've got to protect Tom at the end of the day, and they TB12, and that's why they've gone for it. And then if we just kindly skip the 12th pick.
No,
I think I tell you what, the one thing I will say is,
brave.
He ran a 4.27. I think that's the reason. Combine. I think that's the reason they did it. And I'm not a fan of the combine in regards to the 40 personally because it's not in pads. Yeah. But a 4.27 is unbelievable. So
freaky speed.
It's game changing, and if you can bring in someone opposite Terrell Williams and all that can just blow the roof off, and you've got all the under routes and everything, it opens up your offense. So I have another friend that's also a very big Raiders fan. I'm not sure how confident he was on the pick as a whole, but I think I don't see a problem with the Ruggs pick. I think people have looked into it too much personally. But obviously I could be wrong in hindsight.
I mean, being a Raider, I think. But obviously, I was up watching the draft with Dan, and I was like, we both said this pick has got to be CD Lamb. Like, the guy's an animal. It was between him and Judy, in my opinion, who are the best wide receiver in the draft. I like CD Lamb, and I was waiting for his name to be called, and obviously Henry Ruggs got called. In my opinion, having played against, well, not me personally, but the Raiders playing against the Chiefs, obviously twice a year, I think it just came to the fact that we're fed up of playing Tyreek Hill and we've tried to copy that offense. I think he'll be a playmaker, but I just worry he's going to be more John Ross than he is Tyreek Hill. John Ross came in, set a lightning, obviously, the record 40-yard dash, and I worry that he's going to be more of a John Ross than he is a Tyreek Hill. And I just think the safer pick would have been Judy or Lamb. That's what I've got to say on it. I think
that's my exact assessment on it, to be honest. You had the chance to take... we've already spoken of Tua as potentially having that Hall of Fame ceiling, and I think CD and Judy both also have that ceiling. Whilst it's a ceiling, obviously, I think Ruggs has the ability to again be a long-term starter at the position for you, be a game changer for you. But I don't want to say he's going to be a gadget player because I hate that term. I think it's really demeaning of certain players. But Ruggs in college had I think it's about 500 yards rushing as well as 600 yards receiving. I think it was in his final season at Bama.
Ruggs had, so Ruggs' stats were 40 receptions, 746 yards, an average of 18.6 yards per reception, 7 touchdowns. But if you compare that to CD Lamb, who had 62 receptions, 1,327 yards, with an average of 21.4 yards per reception and 14 touchdowns, I just don't think there's any comparison. And I think one thing that's forgotten is Henry Ruggs was in an Alabama offense. CD Lamb didn't have those fellow talented wide to that level, high level receiver around him that Ruggs had. So I think where matchups on corners would have been more favourable to Ruggs in some positions, CD Lamb would have been on the best corner in that team. I just would have taken Lamb.
Yeah.
Do you think Lamb ran a 4.51, didn't he? Is that right?
Something like that.
I think it's 4.51. 0.24 doesn't sound huge, but I think in this case to the Raiders it clearly spoke a lot. I just don't see another reason, at least from my perspective, that they go over CD Lamb.
I think if you look at the balance of the Raiders' offense, you've got Terrell Williams, you've now got Ruggs, you've got some of your mid-round picks that are going to factor into this. But if you look at their present offense, if you're just substituting a player in, you've got Terrell Williams, you've got Ruggs, you've got Waller, and you've got Renfro. You've kind of got a bit of everything. You've got the big guy that can win on the outside and win in the red zone. You've got Waller, who turned into a really elite tight end actually last year. Whether or not he can reproduce it a second season, you don't know. But you've got to assume that he's going to reproduce.
See if they do find his stash of coke or not.
Absolutely. This is a man that could be in prison by mid-season. But you've then got the guy. You've got Ruggs on the outside, who is that elite over-the-top speed, and then underneath you've got Renfro, he's your check down. He's your niche player in the slot, like a Cole Beasley type. They've got quite a balanced receiving core to that offense, and that's not even including the fact that actually you've got some really unique pieces at running back. You drafted your late round running back, whose name's escaping me right now, but
Lynn Bowden.
That's it. But a really, really nice receiving back option to complement Jacobs, who can also catch the football. You've got quite a nice balanced offense there for Carr to work off of, and I think, unlike certain teams that we're going to get to later in this first round sort of analysis, you invested in your quarterback in this draft. You said to your quarterback that you're going to back him, and you've backed him with players.
Thank God.
But yeah, I guess really, we've already spoke about Tristan Wirfs at 13 in relation to the other tackles. Javon Kinlaw, I don't think there's a great deal that needs to be said about this pick. It's a really nice speed rush option, which I think will complement the loss of DeForest Buckner to the Colts. This was technically the Colts pick if you take away from the fact that they traded down, but this is I think it's a really nice fit. I think it makes so much sense. I think it's a great selection first up.
Rumour has it was they were waiting for Ruggs, though. They thought they were going to get Ruggs.
I think Ruggs is the perfect complement for that Shanahan offense, because you look at Deebo Samuel last year. Deebo Samuel ran the ball quite a lot as that sort of jet sweep back. And I think Ruggs would be unbelievable in that model, especially because he had the college production to match that system. But they get a day one starter to replace the guy that they've actually just traded away for a first round pick, and they've got a massive contract saving on it. I think it's quite a very, annoyingly, especially as a Seahawks fan, I think it's very sensible business within our division, which we've already seen with the Cardinals pick. Later on in the draft as well, I think the Rams drafted relatively well, except for ignoring the blatant holes that they had at offensive line. But yeah, Jerry Jeudy, I know we've just discussed at length.
Wide receivers.
Land and
I think that's such a good pick.
Brilliant.
Genuinely.
Well, the Broncos had an
I just
unbelievable
think,
draft, didn't they?
Yeah, I don't know how many receivers did they pick?
I think
this
it's
draft.
If it's off the top of my head, I believe they selected 3 receivers.
Yeah, I just think
KJ Hamler was their second round pick, who I love.
Yes, that's the guy. I just think they're doing the right thing, to be honest. The QB's name's escaping my head.
Drew Lock.
Drew Lock. I think he showed quite good potential last year. I think not enough people are really talking about him. I think
Are you saying
you
they
give him
found
those
the key
options.
to the lock?
Yeah, literally.
Can we edit that out as well? Or?
Yeah.
I just think Jerry Jeudy and I just think they're doing the right things really in Denver, which is very rare to say based on their history. So I look forward to seeing Jerry Jeudy for Denver, as long as it's not against the Steelers.
Yeah, I think it's a great pick. It's a great fit. I think they're really going to highly benefit off of the pick as well. And they're going to get that immediate starter opposite Cortland Sutton. And they've got a really good guy in the rotation, as we just mentioned, in Hamler. AJ Terrell. Now, this was.
Sorry, can I just say one more quick thing on the Jerry Jeudy pick? What I loved about, because I think Drew Lock has a few question marks around him, obviously he didn't start last season, but I think what I loved was he showed that leadership straight away to show that I am the QB, I am the guy that's going to lead this team. When the Jerry Jeudy pick came in, he reached out to him on that first night saying, right, here's the playbook, let's start going through it. I'm here for you whenever you need it. Yeah. And I love that he's reached.
Yeah, I love that.
We'll talk about the whole Brett Favre, Rodgers, Jordan Love relationship a bit later, but I love to see it when a quarterback brings it. Obviously, it's a bit different having another quarterback bringing into a wide receiver who's going to help your yardage total. But I love that when a quarterback or any member of the team reaches out to another player, especially with someone like Jerry Jeudy, who's supposed to be a star, just to give him that instant boost and welcome to the NFL.
Yeah, love it. So, AJ Terrell, this was probably one of the first picks of this draft where it makes sense in terms of the needs of the team. And yet I couldn't help but feel like it was a reach.
Yeah, I agree.
I had Terrell sort of in that 35 to 45 sort of range in terms of a pick. I think they probably could have traded back, especially considering we're going to talk about it at length, no doubt. the Raiders pick at 19, but I really
Best pick of the draft.
I really feel like they could have traded back. It's all dependent on whether or not the trade option is there, but the next pick that I had really going here was maybe Jeff Gladney, and he went 31. So I think there's a really interesting sort of argument with that pick. Thoughts, guys?
I think it was a really strong cornerback draft. I think there was quite a lot of depth, and I think teams sort of panicked to get their guy early.
Yes.
For cornerbacks when they could have held off a bit and got them later in the draft. And as we said on the night, Dan, I think they could have traded back.
Yeah. And
it's been widely documented in the media that they potentially should have traded back. But at the end of the day, as you say, they've got a position of need. And if you had said to them, if they had their draft board at their start and their cornerbacks, their number one need, and he's their guy with what's left that's been taken off the, I suppose they're going to be happy they've got him.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. They've filled the need, haven't they?
Yeah, I think it just comes down to, like you said, he was clearly their guy, and they obviously were happy enough to take him, and they might live to regret it, they might reap the rewards, but again, it's something we'll find out, I guess.
Definitely.
Cool. Josh, how does that fence feel, mate? You couldn't have sat on that any fucking mortgage. They might live to regret it, they might not. It's their guy.
Well, I don't want to stress on pick 17 too much because again we spoke about the receiver.
Touch CD Lamb, yeah.
I really, really feel like this was probably the steal of the first round just because of the talent of the player and where they've got him. CD Lamb's again an instant day one starter is going to be a monster in that Dallas offense, especially considering that the Prescott passing revolution sort of developed a bit last season.
The Dak Chise.
The Dak Chise, yeah.
Oh, you're making me sick.
I hated this pick in terms of just as an NFL fan, seeing the Cowboys get a weapon like this. It was pretty heartbreaking, but the Cowboys fans will love this pick. Absolutely.
Saying that, Dak still hasn't signed. They've proposed the franchise tag.
I think he'll play under the tag. I'll be very surprised if, for whatever reason or another, they choose not, or he chooses not to play under the tag purely because I think he'll get his contract, but I can't see him being there in the early stages of pre-season, whenever that might be. I guess it might prove to the Cowboys' benefit the COVID-19 situation is actually a lot of these mini camps we're missing out on. And actually, if they miss out on those and Dak was going to sit him out anyway, they're not really a loser in context of the rest of the league.
Yeah, I think if you look at that offense and the weapons he's got now, so CD Lamb, Amari Cooper, Gallup, and Ezekiel Elliott, with a mean O-line, the upside's huge. Which is, I just don't understand why they didn't pay him. I think when you've got that many, take away CD Lamb, but even with the weapons he already had, I would have paid him. I think at a QB, it shouldn't be a position where you have uncertainty. Because I think when the QB's uncertain of his future, the whole that can feed into the rest of the offense.
Absolutely. We're going to talk about the Eagles situation, I think, in a little bit of depth post first round. But yeah, I think QB certainty is what you almost desperately need. But I guess really, if we sort of float on to sort of from here, really, there's a few little casing points really we want to talk through. Austin Jackson to the Dolphins, I think, is a very sensible pick. They need to protect Tua. They take the next best tackle that's on the board. I think it's a pretty bread and butter pick for the Dolphins here. You've just drafted your guy, injury prone, draft some protection.
Agreed.
Arnett at 19. Now, I'm going to let you talk about this in a little bit of depth, but all I want to get in there is this is a guy I had a third round grade on.
You know what? Go on. I'll let you say your piece, and then I'll intervene.
He's got notable, very poor character references from his time at Ohio State. He played well. Don't get me wrong. When you're opposite Okuda, life is probably a lot easier because he's going to follow their elite guys. But it just felt like a little bit of a panic pick. And I don't think that's the case. I think you've got a very good GM in Mike Mayock. But I just don't understand why you made that pick there.
Well, obviously, I've done a lot of reading and a lot of listening into this pick. I always thought we were going to trade down this pick. We were heavily documented before the draft started that we were going to trade down this pick. And likewise, I think we could have got him in the second round. I don't think he would have fallen to the third in what was a strong cornerback draft. as you said, it's been widely spread that the reason he was on most teams' boards as a second round, third round pick, and then the rest of the teams actually didn't have him on the board because of immaturity issues. A lot of people do struggle with immaturity issues in the changing room, and can up going from personal experience. No, but yeah, he did slip off a lot of people's draft boards completely because of immaturity and character issues. But I have watched his tape. I do think he's a very good player. Looking at the stats, he only gave away 3 touchdowns in 3 years. Obviously, you then look at his other side. Look, he was manning up on the weaker receiver when you would have a Cuda on the other side. That's got to be taken into consideration. His 40-yard dash for his size wasn't exactly great at 4.56. I obviously would have preferred Henderson, Jeff Okudah, or AJ Terrell, but at the end of the day, in Mayock we trust. And you've got to go with it. Widely ranked as the worst draft performance team last year, and we ended up having arguably the best performing draft. So I think we roll with it. We needed a corner, and we filled the position. Whether he will be an instant starter, I don't know, but I think we should have traded back. I genuinely do. I'll get onto this later when we discuss our own teams, but I think Amick Robertson, 4th round pick at pick 139 from Louisiana Tech, I think is going to be a really, really good nickel corner for us. And similarly, I think we could have just got Arnett later in the draft. But yeah,
I think just going to the whole trading back and all that, I think, like you said, it was heavily documented that you maybe wanted to do so. The problem is when it's documented is that we were speaking about this a while ago, is if teams know you want to trade back, they're not going to offer you that lucrative, package of picks that you want. If they think, oh, they don't really want the pick, we're not going to give them, an extra pick for whatever. So I think if teams kind of were aware you wanted it, maybe you had the offers, they just weren't as good as maybe your evaluation on Arnett. So
yeah,
I think what's huge about this pick as well is that obviously the Khalil Mack. I think this is the last first round pick from the Khalil Mack trade. So what you've got to now weigh up is Keelan Ferrell, Josh Jacobs, and Damon Arnett the same value to our team that Khalil Mack would be?
I mean, the answer is no.
I don't know, man. We'll see at the end of the season when he's got 93 picks. 93 picks for 100.
Single game record for 12 receptions.
Yeah. But yeah, and just a quick thing about his character. We've seen it with Antonio Brown. I just can't see anybody being allowed to get away with being immature or not buying into the whole Gruden grinder. Not his grinder profile, Gruden grinder, as in his mentality on a football field. Mentality in football, I just can't see anyone getting away with that. And I think that would have been really nailed into in the obviously interviews before drafting him. So in Mayock we trust and we'll go with it.
I think the only sort of counter argument to that is a lot of people said, Antonio Brown won't get away with it in Oakland. I mean, technically he did. You guys had to get rid of him.
He didn't get paid.
He didn't get paid. I get that, but what I mean is let's be honest. Imagine if he walked on the field for Oakland. It might have been a different story for you last year completely. True. Same with any team he'd walk onto the field for. I just feel like the whole Gruden ethos and all this, I'm not sure how much I personally buy into it. I'm not a big fan of the Raiders. I don't really follow them closely at all. But I just find them cringy, if I'm honest. And I wonder if some players may feel the same way. So it'll be interesting to see how Damon turns out and how his attitude changes or if it doesn't. Some players have bad attitude and it works out for them. So it'll be interesting to see.
Point. I think there's a very fine line between the cringiness and actually being a great coach. And I think, you mentioned with Gruden the fact that some players have said that they find it quite cringy. You've got Pete Carroll, who people seem to love it, and I actually don't think there's much difference between their personality types and how they.
No, that's a fair point.
Players. But I guess if we these next 4 picks for me, I don't think there's necessarily great talking points about them. Clavon Chason, the Jags needed another defensive end, especially now it looks as though they're desperately trying to ship Ngakoue. I personally
surprised he didn't go in the draft, by the way. I thought he would have got traded.
I thought he might have been used as a bit of trade bait for maybe the Jags moving up. Maybe they shopped him and it didn't happen. But I think it's pretty much nail on that I don't think he's going to be playing in Duval County next year. With that,
going back to the point you said though, Josh, when teams know, value like that relationship between Yannick Ngakoue and the team at the Jags, that relationship is never going to get fixed now, is it? So teams know he'll eventually be made a free agent, or he'll go for a 6th round pick at the start of the season because
Exactly.
I
mean, what did we get for Antonio Brown? Yeah, that's what I mean. Imagine if you said that 2-3 years ago. Like, it's ridiculous. But Absolutely. He's out of the league completely now. So
for me, the Eagles won. I guess it's a little bit of a surprise. They were very wide receiver needy. They take Rager over Jefferson. For me, I loved Jefferson as that 4th guy.
Agreed.
I think he was fighting to be in with that pack of 3, and maybe I almost put him on a similar. If you were to tier him, I had Judy and Lamb, and then had Ruggs and Jefferson as very sort of similar caliber players. And I think taking Rager, I don't think it's a shock. I think he was always going to fall into the bottom half of the first round. Just over Jefferson could work out to be an interesting one. I think Jefferson's going to have a great career at Minnesota.
Agreed.
And I think it's a really nice, again, we go back to these fits. I think it's a great fit for the Vikings. Kenneth Murray. Now, this is worth talking about for me, personally. Probably the 2nd best linebacker in the draft. Probably the most natural middle linebacker in the draft. And obviously, they Chargers trading back into the first round to take him and giving up quite a lot of capital in the process to do so with the Patriots. Now, I love this pick. What about you guys?
Well, they got their guy, didn't they? I think they had a guy on the board and they traded up to get him. I think it's as simple as that. They've obviously felt they've got a need in the team and they filled it. I don't think there's... Obviously, Simmons is already gone. Next best linebacker available, and they've gone and got him.
Yeah. I think the other thing to add is, I'm not sure, I could be wrong. I think they released Thomas Davis after they got their guy. And, he led the team in tackles last year. They need someone to step in and take that. Perryman's in his final year. He needs some pressure on him, even if Davis is gone as well now. And I don't know. I just think it's a pretty safe pick, but it's a solid pick at the same time.
Need, isn't it? I think it's the way you can probably put it. And I think they've got that guy now that I think is really going to make an impact on their defense. In addition to some other quite big playmakers they've got in their defense, they've got quite a formidable run defense now. The Chargers. Again, the Saints, only 4 picks in this year's draft, but I really like this fit for them also. The Saints didn't have many holes on their roster. Probably player for player, the best roster in the NFL, maybe. I personally didn't have any glaring needs that I could identify for him. So taking Cesar Ruiz for me is taking, again, what is most likely the best player available. On
agreed.
And someone that's, I think, can produce for them again on day one, if not have massive competition on that interior Saints offensive line.
Well, there was quite a lot of talk, wasn't there? Like, people said, with a roster as strong as the Saints, what position are they going to take? And I think they've just gone best player available, as you said. There was a lot of talk about them trying to go for a bit of a risky pick or a weapon they could add to already good offense and give Drew Brees another tool. I think they've just gone best player available.
Yeah, and do you know what? This next pick, again, won't float on this one too much, but Brandon Ayuk was a player that I really liked coming out of this year's draft. I think when people were evaluating N'Keal Harry, they didn't realise how good a player was actually on the other side of the field to him.
Agreed.
And Brandon Ayuk is actually quite a different player to the Ruggs fit. They are getting themselves a true traditional outside receiver that is actually going to produce on day one for them. And it was a position of quite big need actually for the Niners. They have a deep wide receiver core in terms of personnel, I don't think they had a deep core in terms of production, and I think they've added a piece for Garoppolo here. They traded up with the Vikings, but actually in context of their trade down from 13, they already gained some capital off of the Buccaneers, and it's a really nice pick. But this next pick, 26, I don't want to glaze over that pick too much from the Niners, but this pick is probably the most, I don't even want to call it polarizing, probably the most controversial pick of this year's draft, and one that has been, for the most part, dare I say, panned in terms of both pundits and fans alike. Thoughts on Jordan Love out of Utah to the Packers?
I think you've got to start off by saying they traded up for this pick.
Yes.
This pick didn't fall to them. Like, they weren't here thinking, right, what do we fancy doing? They wanted this pick, and they must have thought somebody else was going to go and get Jordan Love. Otherwise, they wouldn't have traded up. So, obviously, they gave away their other first-round pick at number 30 and at the cost of a fourth-round pick. And it just doesn't make sense. Aaron Rodgers has got 4 years left on his deal. And as they've said themselves, one of the best quarterbacks, they've said the best quarterback, but one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. and they've gone and drafted another quarterback when they've got 4 years left on the Rodgers deal. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, their GM's quoted to say, I can understand the fan base and people thinking, why would you do this at this time? But I think the value of our board and the way it's at, it was just the best move for the Green Bay Packers. But even then, I just don't think that answers anything.
No.
Like, are they saying that?
It's just waffle.
And I know Brett Favre, obviously 36 years old. They then drafted Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers now 36 years old. They now draft Jordan Love. It's sort of like, excuse the pun, but a love story, and they match up. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, looking at his 2019 season stats, 61% pass completion, 3,402 yards, 20 touchdowns, 17 interceptions. That doesn't scream up to me. Trade up and get me to potentially replace Aaron Rodgers. I don't know about you guys.
I think just adding to the whole trade up thing. I think so. They got the pick from Houston, I think, and the teams that were picking were Houston, Seattle, Ravens, Tennessee. I don't understand which one of those was going to take Jordan Love realistically.
Yeah,
maybe Tennessee.
I think they've really invested in Tannehill. I think that
that's what I mean.
Someone's trying to trade back. The only thing that made me think on the night was, have they done that because the Pats are trying to get back up into the bottom of the first round ahead of Green Bay? But I was so at a loss of it. So we were talking a little bit before the podcast tonight, and I read one of the most horrifying statistics I think I've ever read, actually, which is Aaron Rodgers in his career has thrown a touchdown pass to one first rounder. One. Peyton Manning threw 299 touchdown passes to first round receivers or players which were drafted in the first round, I think was the category.
Jesus.
But again, as we said, it's because they don't draft wide receivers, though. They don't give him targets.
Do you know what? What I found even worse, and I actually think it's something, we'll go on to it when we're talking a little bit about our favourite drafts this year, but they didn't draft a single wide receiver this year, the Packers.
The only thing I would touch on with the Packers wide receivers are, from an outsider's view, I quite like Valdez-Scantling. I'm not saying he's going to be, your star guy. You still got Devontae Adams there. I think they've signed Devin Funchess.
Yeah, I mean,
that's a 30% chance of mediocre success. But Alan Lazard, I don't think is that bad a player. I think it's, Rodgers didn't have a very good statistical year last year. There's a lot of factors that play into that, but it is disgusting that they didn't draft a wide receiver, especially of the class that was available. But I do think that people sleep on the existing up-and-coming players. I think Lazard and Scantling, they both must be, 24, 25? They can't be that old.
Yeah, they're quite young guys. They are quite young guys.
So I think that's the way to look at it. If I was a Packers fan, I'd just have my fingers crossed that, one of those two is going to step up and, you don't want two receivers having 400 yards and then one guy having 1,500. You need the second guy to be elite. 800, 900 yards, and then you're looking at a proper offense. And I think that's what Green Bay believe they've got in what I hope is Funchess, Lazard, or Scantling. So,
do you know what though? I think the thing that makes this pick worse for me is actually their second round pick taking AJ Dillon. Now,
I couldn't agree more.
I loved AJ Dillon coming into this draft. This was a guy I was really high on, and someone that I had in that second, third round range. So it's not even where they drafted him. But they've got two unbelievable starting running backs.
What are they doing?
Tandem of backs. And they take a third. And then you look at all the receivers that were still on the board at that time. And then you add to the fact that they took a quarterback in the first round. And it does make you think, are they just giving up on Rodgers? Are they set? Well, and when I say giving up, I don't mean we're going to trade you away in week 4, but more, I wouldn't mind seeing you do poorly this year because we've drafted your replacement. And if that gives us ammunition to trade you away, let you make a move with someone else at 37 years old, similar to Brett Favre when he was 36, then is that it feels eerily reminiscent of those moves. And
how long did Brett Favre have on his contract, though?
I think he had 3 years, and I think he played 2 years. So on the year that Rodgers was drafted, I think Rodgers sat behind Favre for 2 seasons. So maybe they're looking at it as a similar system as that, but to use a first-round pick, And
Rodgers has made some comments as well, if I'm not mistaken, and I think that's the worst thing that's come from it because it's very well documented that Brett Favre wasn't a huge fan of the Aaron Rodgers pick, and he wasn't exactly the best mentor to him when he was in the dressing room and all that. I think it's quite, Aaron Rodgers doesn't have two legs to stand on if he doesn't sit there and be that mentor for Jordan Love. It's not always about you. It's about the franchise sometimes. And it'd be wrong for Rodgers to assume that Jordan Love is a failure and he's going to leave that team in 4 years. But again, it's a weird pick.
Yeah.
It's just odd.
I think I've got 2 points that I want to raise on this one. The first one being, you've got to remember they were one game off the Super Bowl last year. They were in the championship game, weren't they?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This was an ideal spot at the end of the first. If they had stayed at 30 at the end of the first round, to go out there and get someone who's going to compete to start on that offense, not take a backup, someone who's going to be that addition to that offense or that defense, who's going to make them that extra step and go to the Super Bowl. The second point being, this is now 2 head coaches now in a row that have sort of made sure that Rodgers isn't the guy.
Yeah.
The previous head coach, who's obviously now at the Cowboys, didn't bring in a wide receiver for him to help in the first round or a notable wide receiver in the early picks. And then Matt LaFleur's done the exact same by bringing in a quarterback behind him. And then this brings on to my next point, which is it time to start questioning Rodgers? You've got Russell Wilson, who doesn't have a wide receiver that's as good as Devontae Adams, yet Russell Wilson year in, year out will drag that team to the playoffs.
Yeah.
You've got Carson Wentz last year, whose wide receiver core was poor, if we're honest. Not a playoff caliber, yet he dragged that team, being as injury prone as he is, dragged that team to the playoffs. Yet you've got Aaron Rodgers, who we see in this high regard. Don't get me wrong, I think Russell Wilson's better than Aaron Rodgers. But we see Aaron...
oh, God, no. Jesus. Okay, I personally don't. That's another talk.
Another topic. We see Aaron Rodgers in this high regard, who's got Devontae Adams, who's the best receiver considerably on any of those teams. Yet he doesn't get the same, apart from Devontae Adams, because Devontae Adams, but he doesn't get the same productivity he doesn't improve players to the same extent that Russell Wilson does. I think that's why we have to start asking questions.
No, 100%.
Point here, yeah. And do you know what? The one thing for me that I look at this pick and think, what cost the Packers from going to the Super Bowl last year? And it was their run defense. They could not stop that 49ers run. Now, I looked at this pick, and when I saw Green Bay trade up, I thought they're taking Patrick Queen here. Because they've leapfrogged the Seahawks, who we'll get onto the Seahawks next pick in just a second, but they leapfrogged the Seahawks for that inside linebacker who's going to help them, whilst he's a bit more of a coverage backer, help them shore up the run. Or alternatively, take a guy like Ross Blacklock that was linked quite highly, Epineza, all these run defenders that were still there. I thought, this is a really nice move. And then you hear Jordan Love's name come off the board and think, that's not a win now draft pick.
No.
That's a win 3 years down the line pick.
With huge question marks around it.
Absolutely. And I think this is something that we're definitely going to have to monitor as the season goes on, especially considering that I don't think he's got any chance of playing a game this year unless Rodgers is injured. Let's just get that out there straight away.
Yeah, 100%.
But
or Rodgers leaves.
It's about the conversations that start to come out of Green Bay. Because if you're hearing talk coming out of that team that Rodgers is unhappy about this and Rodgers is unhappy about that and Rodgers has stormed that training, all you're looking at are the precursors to Aaron Rodgers leaving Green Bay. That's what that is. You can look at it whatever way possible, but like you mentioned Favre, you mentioned the fact that Favre was completely unwilling to help and assist Rodgers in his transition into the league. This is eerily reminiscent of that, and I think it's something that we have to monitor. But let's use this as a segue to pick 27. Now, on the night, I'd had a few beers. It's 5 o'clock in the morning. I was furious. Completely transparent. I was livid with this draft pick. And I woke up in the morning with a bit of a fuzzy head and thought, let's actually take a look into this draft pick. Let's take a look into who this guy, because admittedly, Jordan Brooks, all of the research that I'd done on him pre-draft was, this is an elite run stop inside linebacker or potentially transition to outside linebacker. But this is an elite linebacker that will help you immediately stop the run, can occasionally rush the passer from the interior, and will help you produce day one in stopping the run. He's a downhill backer. So my instant thought was, why on earth have we drafted that? We've got KJ Wright and we've got Bobby Wagner. And then I looked more into this draft pick and saw a guy that actually, prior to his final season in college, was actually quite a useful sideline-to-sideline player, which I didn't think he had in him. And the more I thought about it, especially considering that we let Michael Kendricks go, and he was big in this base defense of ours, that base 4-3 that we continue to play as opposed to nickel defense like the rest of the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at it and thought, this is a really, really nice pick, especially when you consider the guys that we then took in the 2nd and 5th round.
Do you want me to give my honest opinion?
I'd love it, please.
I think you've either woke up still pissed, or you've woken up and put some rose, or you've woke up and put on some rose-tinted goggles, mate. It was a shit pick. It was a really shit pick. My reason being is you've got two standout linebackers. It's not a position of need.
But
I think you've got KJ right there, who's getting on, but going on last season. He's still not in decline. You've got Bobby Wagner, who's an absolute beast, arguably the best linebacker in the NFL at the moment.
Best linebacker in football, yeah. Especially.
Yeah, I'd agree. Now Luke Kuechly's gone. I think it does suggest that Pete Carroll's going to run that 4-3 defense and continue to run it in what is a nickel-heavy league. Because as we say, there's a lot of cornerbacks who can play the nickel position still on the draft board. But yeah, I don't think it was the pick. And as you said to me on the draft night, although we were a few beers in, you could have got him later on. This is another position where you could have traded down.
That was an opinion I had, and that was an opinion I had not off of just my draft boards, but actually off of boards of other people. But since the draft, there has been a lot of talk about the fact that the Ravens were in love with Jordan Brooks, and that has been quite widely documented that actually they were very interested in taking him at 28. Now, if that is true, and we've beat them to their pick, they've still got a great player in Patrick Queen. They've got an unbelievable linebacker in Patrick Queen. So again, we go back to that undersized element, but a great player. I just think we've got a really sneaky good draft pick here that we should have taken later. But you go back to that, as we spoke about, if he's the best guy on your board, you kind of have to take him. And from all the conversations coming out of Seattle, that was the best guy on our board.
Well, I think what you said about, nickel is the go-to now, and Seattle still refrain from doing it. I think, if you aren't going to transition like every other team, what you need in that defense is it to be the best. So if Seattle and the front office and Pete Carroll and all that thought that he was the best guy to allow that to happen, it makes sense for them to even reach for him, because after that, who knows who their next guy was to fill that role. It might not have even been a prospect available in the draft. It might have been someone in free agency. And everyone knows free agency is it comes to luck of the draw unless you're some of the best, the top two teams. So I don't know. Like I said, I don't know too much about Jordan Brooks.
Great
what
bloke,
you've
mate.
said,
really, really friendly. Would love to have him on a stag do.
what you've said, I think what Gadsden said, I think it kind of convinced me that I don't see it as a bad pick, but I don't necessarily see it as a top end pick.
If I said to you prior to that pick, though, you're taking Patrick Queen or Jordan Brooks here, you'd have taken Patrick Queen every day of the week.
Absolutely, and the main reason being he's a coverage backer. He's a guy that excels in zone coverage. And as I mentioned, really, my pre-draft sort of thoughts on Brooks were he's an unbelievable downhill force at the linebacker position that can stuff the run. But since you actually look at his film prior to last year, Texas Tech put him in that defensive role because they didn't have anyone else on defense that could do it. And their defensive coordinator came out and said that actually he was by far and away their best defensive player. And the reason they had him in that role was because he was the best athlete on the field, and that's what they needed there. So it feels like it's a prototypical pick, and it's a pick that Seattle loved doing in the first round for all our sins. We love taking that. We love reaching for first round picks because when they hit them, they feel incredible. But the problem is you go back the last 4 years of draft picks, our first round selections have been horrible. And that was my first instinct with this pick. On research, I don't think it's bad. I had this pick as like a C+. You know,
Well,
strengthening a strength. But
you're notoriously a team that drafts for a year forward, aren't you, rather than the current? And I think that is this pick all over.
Definitely. So we touched on Patrick Queen. We won't go too much into that, but Patrick Queen is a very good pick for the Ravens. Very
unbelievable.
Good pick.
They had an unbelievable draft, didn't they?
Again, yeah, it's very similar to Dolphins. Had an exceptional draft. Isaiah Wilson, best right tackle in the draft, true right tackle in the draft. You wouldn't. Part of me thought the Dolphins might select him right at the end of this round, but actually, in context, they needed a left tackle that they're going to play at right tackle for Tua. So Isaiah Wilson, I think, is a great pick. He's a very good run blocker, and I think the Titans have done very well again to put more people in front of people like Derrick Henry to really strengthen their offense. Igbinoghene, very steady pick from the Dolphins. They needed to strengthen.
Great name.
Very good name. I'm not even going to try and pronounce because I know I've just it. But again, very steady corner in that sort of pack of corners that were always going to go maybe high second round, if not sneak into the first round.
So I have a slight issue with this pick.
Okay.
I don't know. I just think it was a bit odd based on the money that's currently being spent in that position by Miami.
Yeah. Well, I had this pick. We were talking about again. You know, mentioned we listened to it on the night. But we turned to each other straight away, Ieuan, didn't we? And said, "Oh well, this is McKinney."
Mm.
And when it wasn't McKinney, it was okay then. That's interesting. And I think McKinney.
All right.
Nice. Yeah, that would have been a really nice pick for them. I think McKinney, and that's a great pick for the Giants in the top of the second round. But I just think Xavier Howard had injury problems last year. He's on a lot of money. If they can get a guy in that can replace him after the end of next year, you could see Xavier Howard traded to save cap space. You know, he's the third highest paid corner in the league. Great player. But if they've got money to spend, they're trying to build an elite sort of rotational system there under Flores, especially on that defense. Yeah. I don't hate the pick, but you're right. There probably was better players on the board at different positions that they could have actually taken, especially someone like McKinney.
Well, I think like you said as well, he missed, I think, 11 games last year, and I was surprised he wasn't traded last year when they were trading off assets. I was very surprised that he wasn't one of them. You know, a lot of teams would love a corner like Howard. Obviously, the injury didn't help, I'm sure. But like you said, you're probably right. I reckon there's no way the guy's being re-signed whenever that contract ends. I won't be shocked if he does get traded away. But hard coming off an 11-game injury. So be interesting to see.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the next pick as well, I love Jeff Gladney at TCU. I thought he was a very good corner. Again, Xavier Rhodes hitting free agency this year. The Vikings immediately addressed that concern. I think the Vikings had a very understated draft in terms of plaudits, but I do think they drafted well this year. And Gladney, I think, is great value at pick 31. I don't want to, again, try not to glaze over picks too much, but I think it's quite interesting to talk about pick 32. Edwards-Helaire over Swift. Now, I think it was pretty obvious that the Chiefs were going to take a running back here. Even though Edwards-Helaire is a very good back, I was very surprised they didn't take Swift.
Well, they messaged Andy Reid messaged Mahomes and said, "Who do you want?" And he said Clyde. And Andy Reid had Clyde at the top of his board for running back.
I didn't know. That's really interesting.
Yeah, Andy Reid had Clyde at the top of his board for running backs, and he said to Mahomes, if you had the pick, who do you want? And he said, "I want Clyde." So obviously they've never really replaced Kareem Hunt, have they, at running back to the extent that Kareem was used, and I think they're hoping he's going to be that guy.
Yeah, and with him and Williams, they've got a nice little tandem set of backs there as well.
Yeah.
It's an interesting one. Yeah, I've always been, and ironically, especially as a Seahawks fan with Rashad Penny a couple of years back, but I hate drafting running backs in the first round. Even a Saquon Barkley type guy, he's an instant franchise changer. McCaffrey, same, but
Josh Jacobs.
But quite honestly, again, Josh Jacobs, but you see how many times you can hit on these players, but at the same time, you can hit on players in the fourth round as a running back, and you're not paying them the same sort of money, and there's plenty of depth at those positions. So I was quite intrigued, dare I say, with this pick, but because it's the Chiefs and they're so deep at so many positions, they're Super Bowl champions, they've got an elite offense, you've got one of the best schematic minds in the NFL in terms of offense. Give him a piece that he can actually run the ball with as well, and suddenly that Chiefs offense is scary.
Frightening, yeah.
Really, really scary. But yeah, if they still had Kareem Hunt, I think they'd be 10 times more productive than they were last year in a bizarre way. And now they've sort of added Kareem Hunt type where he can catch the ball and he can run downhill. He's a really nice rounded back. I like it. I do like it. And I hate saying that as someone that is a fierce, sort of staunch opposition towards drafting running backs in the first round.
No, I think, like you said, it just fits, doesn't it?
Yeah.
When you have a roster like they do, you just fill the hole, and that hole was running back. So, although I would like to add that I still rate Damian Williams. I think he's a good back.
Very good.
He had a good Super Bowl. I know his stats were a bit inflated with the 40-yard rush at the end, but he won me 50 quid on Super Bowl night, so I'm quite a big fan. So
this channel does not promote gambling of any time. Gadsden's had some very tough times in the past. Doesn't know about one thing I will say on the running back topic, I'm in complete agreement with Gadsden. Unless they're an elite talent like Saquon Barkley, don't take a running back in the first round. However, I think with this Chiefs pick, it's who their star QB wanted. It's who Andy Reid wanted. Go for him. What I will say about running backs is I think it is so dependent on the O-line. The success of the running back is more dependent on the O-line's talent than it is on the running back talent. And that is why I think you see fourth-round running backs coming in and having lightning seasons, like when Le'Veon Bell had that whole year with the Steelers where he sat and cried while producing shit music. Yeah, James Conner coming in having an absolute steamer of a season because his O-line was unreal.
Yeah, it's guy on Twitter who I absolutely obsessed with his tweets, a guy called Ben Baldwin, and he is a massive analytics guy, does an awful lot of statistical breakdowns of games, and he is probably the most anti-drafting a running back in the first round guy you'll ever follow. But the stats don't lie. Teams with elite graded PFF offensive lines will always have better run games than the teams with elite graded running backs and poor offensive lines. So it's pretty clear. And, the Seahawks did it this year. There was a lot of talk about us taking Jonathan Taylor, especially in the first round, which was terrifying. We didn't take a running back until DJ Dallas in the fourth round.
Great name.
Actually, great name as well. Unbelievable name.
On the mic. Radio 1. Other radio networks are available.
But we took that downhill mauler in Lewis that's really going to turn around our offensive run game, I think, and actually means that the existing guys we got on our roster and the existing guys you can pick up for cheap are actually going to have a dramatic effect on the production of your offense. But I guess that brings to a close really our first round draft recaps. So what we wanted to do really, there are a couple of points we wanted to tackle outside of the first round. For me, there were a few surprises that we've already glanced over a little bit in terms of first round talent dropping, like Epineza, Gross Matos, and the likes. But there are a few players we wanted to talk about really. One of them is Jake Fromm. Now, Jake Fromm was a guy I think consensus-wise pre-draft people were mocking in the bottom of the third or mid to bottom of the third, maybe slipping into the fourth or maybe even creeping into the second. Jake Fromm dropping to the fifth.
Disgusting. Disgusting.
But it is when you see Ieuan go ahead of him, who he beat out at Georgia, there's something weird going on with that pick. I couldn't work it out. What's your thoughts?
I think they watched QB1 and saw how obsessed he was with hunting deer and they just bottled it. No, I mean, looking at his stats, 60% completion, 2,860 yards, 24 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. They're solid stats.
Yeah.
They're not mind-blowing stats, but they're solid. I think compared with Jordan Love, they shit on Love's stats. I just don't see how he's dropped to the fifth.
Yeah.
I don't get it. I think, and what I think is very strange is I saw him as someone with a Patriots logo already put on his chest. I think he's not the social media guy. He's, apart from he had that one blip in his final year at college, he's going to be a guy who respects Bill Belichick and buys into the ethos of the team. He's going to want to be that natural leader wherever he's been. I thought it was an obvious pick, and when he kept dropping, I think the Patriots took a kicker before even, like, whether they considered Drake Fromm or not, we never know. We weren't the dog sitting in Bill Belichick's chair. However, they took a kicker before taking a QB when they've just lost TB12. It's mind blowing.
Well, I mean, you mentioned the Patriots, but the Patriots took Kyle Duggar, which is, I wanted to talk about this separately, but I think it's quite a weird natural transition quickly. they took a D2 player with pick 65, a D2 safety. It was on no one's boards, I think, in the first 4 rounds of the draft. Like, the Patriots had a bizarre draft. I don't like bashing the Patriots because they're very good at what they do.
But they don't draft well. If you look historically, they don't draft well.
And the kicker you mentioned Rohrwasser, that was the kicker they took. I don't know if you saw. He's extremely conservative. He's got like a. I don't know have you seen the tattoo that he got? This was brought up actually post draft.
Oh, some sort of militia, isn't it?
It's a militia. He's got a tattoo of like a far right militia on his arm that he's suggested. Yeah, I'll get that covered up. So you're talking about actually Jake Fromm, who was a very nice quarterback talent, doesn't have great arm strength, isn't prototypical. So you're going back to that argument all over again. But a very consistent college starter at a massive college competing at the highest level. They could have taken that guy. They could have taken him in the 5th round, pick 14.
For next to nothing, yeah.
Instead, they take a borderline Nazi militia kicker.
I think it comes down to Bill Belichick sits there and he's like, how much can I take the piss out of this NFL system? I'm gonna get rid of Tom Brady. I'll tell you what, I'll let you have Gronk for a 7th round pick. And I'm going to sit here with my dog in the chair, not giving a flying fuck, and just see how far.
And still win the Super Bowl.
And still go to the playoffs. I think that's what it comes down to.
I think the other thing to acknowledge is the free agency market with QBs right now. You know, there's not necessarily the young guy available, but you've got Cam. I don't believe Andy Dalton is going to be wearing a Bengal jersey again. You know, there's options. There's options available. And you know, like you said, that if Jake Fromm doesn't have that arm and stuff, and they prefer someone ahead of him, I don't know. I was personally not sold on Jake Fromm. He got a lot of hype 2 years ago, maybe. You know, QB1 obviously aids that. I don't know. I didn't see him drop him to the 5th. That's harsh, almost. But I don't know if Patriots would be a place for him. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what he does.
Like, you're a QB who's been the big dog since high school. Well, before that, because he was unreal at baseball as well. But you're the big dog coming out of high school. They got this massive documentary about you. You then go to college and he started in his first year, didn't he?
He did, yeah.
At Georgia, yeah. And he started in his first year. You then lead the team throughout your college career. You're sitting there on draft day and you're thinking, he was predicted bottom of the 2nd, 3rd, wasn't he? Everyone had him at. And I think he must have been sitting there, all that hype around him that's followed him since high school. And you're sitting there and you're still sat there in the 5th round and teams are taking kickers above you. That must feel so shit. Like, compare it to when you're on the playground at school. It never happened to me because I've always been an unbelievable talent at everything. But when you're on the playground at school and they're picking teams at lunch, and like, times that by 1 million. Do you know what I mean? And like, he must have been falling. It must have been so shit.
I don't know. He's still picking up the paycheck. Do you know what I mean?
No, but you know what I mean. Like, when you've had that hype around, obviously it's not like that. But when you've had that whole hype around you to then fall that low, it must feel shit.
Yeah, for sure.
Where you know you're going to be a backup as well. Like, the Bills had a great season last year. He's not going in there to compete for a starting spot.
Not everyone's convinced on Josh Allen, though. I think it's worth acknowledging that. I mean, I like Josh Allen a lot.
I like Josh Allen.
This is a podcast where we're going to talk a lot about how much we like Josh Allen, because I love Josh Allen.
Yeah, for sure.
I've got a Josh Allen tattoo. How much do you like him?
Well, his tattoo's on my willy, so...
it did cover up that militia one that you had, though, Dan.
But, I think they've got themselves a guy that if Allen goes down, and he's a guy that likes taking a hit, he's a guy that is not afraid to take big hits on the run, especially trying to steal extra yards. If he goes
I like
down,
that.
Yeah, I do. Also,
yeah, for sure.
If they've got Big Ben's a proponent of it as well, he loves it. But they've got that guy that straight away, if he goes down, I think they've got a very serviceable backup. They took in the 5th round, and we've seen late round not even necessarily late rounds. We've seen quarterbacks fall on people's board in recent history. You know, Russell Wilson, Tom Brady. These are all guys that fell on people's boards because of one reason or another, usually related to athleticism. Jake Fromm doesn't have the big arm, who turn around and later on into their career become very, very talented quarterbacks. And I'm not saying Jake Fromm's going to necessarily be in that category, but if you had to pick one player from this draft that you think, actually, you've got a guy in the 5th round there that could be 6 or 7 year starter at the quarterback.
He's a savage. I was going to break out. I was going to break out the TikTok reference.
But I guess, you know, other picks really. It was quite a deep draft this year. There was a lot of guys that slipped into that second round. I don't want to dwell too many people, but the Bills had a sneaky draft by getting Ebenezer as well, who I love. They got him at 54, which I think's baffling in context with how good a player he is. But I think this is probably a good time actually to maybe take a little bit of a deeper dive into our own team's draft, and maybe
for sure.
Maybe take a look at grading our own team's drafts. And the tangent I was getting at here was Pittsburgh didn't have a first round pick this year, so your second round pick was going to be incredibly highly scrutinised because essentially your first round was Minka Fitzpatrick. So yeah.
So it was really, really important. You got a really good pick here. So
a very good pick here, Josh.
It was really important, Josh.
Also a pick that me and Ieuan would love here. So why didn't you do that, Josh?
Well, I'm not the guy that makes the decisions at the end of the day, to be fair. But I wasn't too pleased when Chase Claypool was initially taken. To be honest with you guys, J.K. Dobbins was there. I was interested in him, and Jalen Hurts, I think would have been a good choice for us. I did want Jonathan Taylor, but he'd gone earlier. Chase Claypool, like I said, I looked into it later after the draft, and I'm a bit more relieved. The guy ran a great 40. You know, people comparing him to Megatron in size and speed. So I think he's already picked up the nickname of Mapletron of some Steelers fans. So I don't know. It's a tough one. I think you'll find he moves to the outside straight away. Randy Finkner's already come out and said Juju's going on the inside, which is great news for us. It is a controversial pick, but, you know, the Steelers, we normally do hit with wide receivers. So fingers crossed on that one.
I think the only similarity he's got with Megatron is that he's got 2 eyes, a mouth, and he plays football, mate. I think that's as far as it goes.
All right, well, we'll see, mate. We'll give it a few years and we'll come back to it.
Was Megatron a tight end? I couldn't remember
that. I've heard the similarities.
Hybrid wide receiver tight end.
Well, moving on to a pick that got a bit of controversy, but I don't think it's fair. Alex Highsmith, you know.
Love the pick. Yeah, likewise.
He's got some ridiculous stats from college, tackles-wise. You know, we're talking 150 plus sort of tackles, plenty of tackles for losses and sacks as well. He's a great pick, and the only reason I feel that way is I'm a big Bud Dupree fan. He's on a franchise tag now. We didn't really have a pass rusher that played much last year outside of TJ and Dupree. So bringing in a guy that can add 1 or 2 sacks at minimum is handy. And hopefully he pressures Dupree to keep up that production that he had last year. So I think that's quite a clever pick in regard to just adding depth into a position that needed it a little bit. McFarland, didn't know too much about him, to be honest with you. I read into him. I know he shared a lot of snaps last year compared to the year before. Again, just adding a guy that can hopefully stay fit in our running back committee is always handy. If he can step up to take a bigger role, I'm more than happy for that to happen. We've got a lot of guys there, so I don't think there's much you can really say on him, to be honest. Kevin Dotson's probably one of the better picks we made. Huge guy. Yeah, huge guy. Can move people. Raymond Foster's just retired, so we needed a guy to fill in there. He doesn't need to start. We've just signed league veteran, what's his name, Steven Wisniewski, who just won the Super Bowl, I think, with the Chiefs, if I'm not mistaken. But, you know, he's got time to develop. And then Antoine Brooks is a 6th round pick, added to a pretty empty safety room that we have at the moment. I did want a free safety more so. I think we've now got 3 strong safeties and, off the top of my head, 2 free safeties. But the backup guy behind Minka isn't too impressive at the moment. I think Carlos Davies just fits, you know, big boy in the middle. We've got a lot of guys we've brought in Chris Wormley from the Ravens, who I think will take more of Javon Hargrave's snaps. So not the most exciting draft from the Steelers, to be honest with you. But again, we didn't have the first round pick. Never going to complain about Minka. What a great decision on our end. But being a bit biased, I'd probably give it a B- as a draft score. And the only reason I say that before you guys jump in is because I think it was safe outside of Claypool. And then I like the risk on Claypool. So that's the reason I'd give that personally.
Yeah, there's just definitely justification behind that. I mean, I had it penned as a C+. You know, you're really picking at straws, really, if you're going to suggest that you're going to dig deeper into that. I'll jump in with the Seahawks draft now, really. I think they're
it'd be good to talk about the Seahawks now and save the most exciting draft to last. We spoke at depth about Jordan Brooks, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about that pick. I think it was a C-plus pick for the first round, especially with the news that has come out in light of it that he was well sought after by a lot of teams within the league. I love the Darrell Taylor pick. I wouldn't have minded it if we picked him without trading up, but I love the pick. He reminds me, as I said, of Frank Clark, D Ford as well. That sort of edge rusher that if he gets off at the line of scrimmage is going to get a lot of production at the next level. He just needs to work on his discipline in terms of offside. And actually the fact that if he misses the snap, he tends to be lost on the play. Damian Lewis, I love, an absolute mauler. And now we've seen in the light of the fact that we've released Fluker. It's Fluker 2.0. We're getting a massive guy, dominant in the run, is an efficient pass protector, not a great pass protector, but he's a guy that's going to help the Seahawks run offense, which we know Pete Carroll's obsessed with, which is a different debate we can have for another day. Colby Parkinson, it's a meh pick. And the reason I say that, I think he's a very good tight end, but we don't need tight ends. So I think that might have been a best player available selection on the board as opposed to anything else. DJ Dallas, bit more depth for our running back core, especially considering how injury prone we seem to have been over the last few years. And I think he's good value here, actually, towards the bottom end of the fourth round. Alton Robinson is a pick that I'd love to go into more depth about if we had the time. He's that stand-up edge rusher who we've lacked in the last few years in terms of the guy that is purely going to play passing downs. He's going to be dominant off the edge in passing downs, but I wouldn't expect him to have too much impact on the run. And I think we could use him a bit like how we used Dion Jordan when we actually took him as a free agent a few years back, where he tended to only play second and long sort of third down passing downs, as opposed to being a 3 down, 4 down defensive end. Freddie Swain, as a Gators fan, I know I went into a bit of detail about Henderson. I loved Swain in college because he offered that deep threat and he offered that ability to stretch teams over the top. The Seahawks always draft guys like this. We always draft guys that are slightly unrefined route runners. We draft these guys, they come in and their production the first couple of years is iffy. They tend to be on special teams, a lot like Tyler Lockett for us. And Freddie Swain reminds me a lot of Tyler Lockett. He's going to be that punt returner, kick returner for us that's going to play gunner on special teams and will actually build his way into our starting lineup, I think, as the years go on. And alternatively, if he fails, it's a 6th round pick. The only pick I found interesting sort of towards the bottom end of our draft, I think we drafted quite well past the sort of way into the latter rounds, but trading back into the draft for Stephen Sullivan was an interesting one for me. Second tight end on the LSU roster behind, as we're all aware, Thaddeus Moss. If someone told me we're taking LSU tight end here, we're taking Thaddeus Moss. I've seen a lot of stuff suggesting that Sullivan could get kicked outside, or alternatively could be, as he's actually a very good blocker outside. He's got safe hands. It's a really bizarre pick, I think, here, especially now we've got, similar to the Bears. I think we've got 8 or 9 tight ends on our roster now. He's a practice squad guy. It's no doubt. I think we've drafted him so that we can be the first to put him on our practice squad and he can come in and compete in camp. But overall, if I'm honest, our draft, going for a B-. I think I understand the justification behind why people might put us at a C or a C+, but I actually think picks like Darrell Taylor, Damian Lewis, Alton Robinson, they're actually 3 guys we've taken that are going to have immediate impacts, I think, on our team. And then Jordan Brooks as well, fitting into that 4-3 base defense rotation also. I think we've drafted a lot of guys that day one are going to have big production on our team in terms of snap counts. It's just whether or not they can then live up to that production in terms of sacks if they're the defensive ends, and in terms of keeping Russell Wilson upright if you're Damian Lewis. But I like our draft. It's one of the rare drafts in the last few years that I like, but I don't love it, and I think that's why I'd probably put it as a B-.
But I had the Seahawks as a C+. We discussed the Jordan Brooks pick in length previously. I think KJ Wright isn't in decline yet, as we discussed, and Bobby Wagner is just a beast. So I don't think he was the best player for your system at that time. I think you could have put someone in who would have helped the team instantly. I like the Darrell Taylor pick. As I've said previously, I think Clint Hurt's a big fan of him. He is unrefined, but I think he will develop into a star and hopefully fill the void that Clowney left a few seasons ago. And then the only other point I'd make is the DJ Dallas, great name, as we said, out of Miami. If anything, I think it says more about the fitness and health worries surrounding Rashard Penny and Chris Carson. I will quickly touch on the Steelers just briefly. I gave you a C. Again, total of 6 picks, no first round pick. But I think Minka Fitzpatrick does make up for that. The amount he improved your defense last season after his acquisition, I think, was unbelievable. We've discussed Chase Claypool. But what I would have liked to see from the Steelers is almost their draft strategy swapped with the Packers. I think if you would have taken a guy that could have sat behind Big Ben for a year, who is getting bigger and bigger by the year, for a year, really learned his ways, and then taking a receiver later on that he could work with, I think that would have been good to develop. Whereas the Packers swap with you and actually take a wide receiver in the first round to give the QB room certainty for one, and then secondly, Aaron Rodgers a target. Right, moving on to In Mayock We Trust and the Las Vegas Raiders for the first year. I'm going to start with my grade, and I gave us a C. Now, a lot of people have been given a lower grade than a C throughout the media, but I think going on our draft performance last year, everyone slated us, taking Ferrell at 4, taking Crosby so early in the 4th round, taking Hunter Renfrow, who's massively undersized. And then you look at how we performed. We had a really, really good draft year, arguably the best draft year of any team. So I don't think you can grade any lower than a C. However, what I will say is I wouldn't have taken Ruggs where he stood. If we compare his stats to those of CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy, Ruggs did have the fastest 40-yard dash at 4.27. But he only had 40 receptions for 746 yards, 7 touchdowns, whereas Jerry Jeudy had 77 receptions, almost double, 1,163 yards, an average of 15 yards per reception and 10 touchdowns. And then CeeDee Lamb, 62 receptions, 1,327 yards and 14 touchdowns. I just think those stats they're not even comparable. And I think if you also remember that CeeDee Lamb didn't have Jerry Jeudy in that offense with him, that Henry Ruggs did, CeeDee Lamb would have been matched up on the best corner or the best matchup on the opposing defense, whereas Henry Ruggs wouldn't have had that best corner marking him. So personally, I'd have taken CeeDee Lamb because I do think he's got the best chance out of the 3 to be a future Hall of Famer. And I also think he would have been a Gruden grinder in the way he plays and fights for yards after the catch. Damon Arnett, again, we've discussed in detail. Let's be honest, it's a reach. There's no way painting around it's a reach. But at the end of the day, Mike Mayock and John Gruden had their guy, and that's who they're going to go for.
Yeah.
I really like the Lynn Bowden pick in the 3rd round. He's got really, really elite production, I think. I think what we'll see is he'll play a similar role to Taysom Hill does at the Saints. So that Swiss Army knife player, sort of gadget player. He's got quite a lot of elements to his game, having played quarterback, running back, and wide receiver in the last few years. Moving on to the next pick, we've got Brian Edwards. Does have a bit of an injury history, but I would like to sort of compare him, the Brian Edwards pick late in the 3rd round, to the Chase Claypool pick. In what I think the Steelers could have done, I think they could have waited off, got another big guy, say Brian Edwards, quite similarly, 6'3", 215 pounds, a big guy to rotate with Tyrell Williams. I think the Steelers could have done the same, dropped down a bit, maybe got their quarterback, taken a leaf out of the Eagles book, and then taken a wide receiver late on. I would have preferred us to take a defensive tackle at this point. I quite like Neville Gailmore out of Oklahoma, but unfortunately we didn't take him. Going on to the later picks, we had Tanner Muse in the 3rd round, a hybrid linebacker, safety. I think he's undersized. I think he'll be more of a special teams player for us, maybe fit in as a weak side linebacker at times. Jonas Simpson, the guard out of Clemson. We're always going to take a Clemson Tiger. We know we love drafting from them. Big guy, 6'4", 321 pounds. We traded up to get him, which shows we are keen for him. And I think it's a solid rotation role in what is already a strong O-line for Derek Carr. I think he will be the future potential replacement for Gabe Jackson, who we are shopping at the moment. And if not, obviously Richie Incognito is aging now at 36 years old, so he'll be his future replacement. And then my favourite Raiders pick, which is Amick Robertson in the 4th round, pick 139 out of Louisiana Tech. He is what a Gruden grinder is. He is the definition of a Gruden grinder. He's only 5'9", but he had 9 catches on 38 targets with 24 forced incompletions. I think that's an unbelievable player who we've got at quite a late stage. It was a really good draft for cornerbacks. It was a strong cornerback depth. But I think he's going to be a guy that takes a bit of pressure off Lamarcus Joyner, who got sort of forced into that nickel role, and we can rotate him around the defense. Amick Robertson can really fill in at the slot corner nickel role and be a great addition to our defense.
Yeah, I think it was a good draft actually for the Raiders. I think good is probably as far as I can extend to it. And I think it's purely off the back of your 1st round. I like Ruggs. I think he's a great player. But as you said, I think you have the choice of 2 guys that I would have taken there. Likewise with Damon Arnett. I have to look back to Jeff Gladney going at 31 and think that Jeff Gladney, in my eyes, I had as a much better corner than Arnett. But like you said, they had their choices. They'd made them. The Swiss Army knife point, just to touch on with Lynn Bowden, I think is great. I saw him play a lot against our Gators, and He's a real playmaker wherever you put him on the field. He's a really nice fit, I think, as well, especially if you are looking towards building a little bit more of a unique sort of niche offense, which I think you're doing by your picks. I had this as a C+, and I had this as a C+ draft for the Raiders purely because of your first round, because actually your third and fourth round picks that you made,
some great additions.
I thought they were very strong, very strong. Anything to add, Josh?
Yeah, Brian Edwards ain't Chase Claypool. That's absolutely ridiculous.
Tell you what, I bet you
absolute bogeys
right now.
That's some money on it right now.
Yeah,
right now. I'll put money on it. But
tell you what, should we have a little one for the first episode? Should we say
there is no way I'm
receiving yards?
There's no way. I'm saying they're a similar type of player. I'm not saying they're going to get nearly the same receptions this year.
I put my money where my mouth is, mate.
Yeah, who would have thought this a few seasons ago? The Raiders now have a stronger wide receiver room than the Steelers.
No, okay, no, another time.
So
you're a joker.
I guess really off the back of this, then, what we're going to look to do now is just to have our sort of final little recap on the draft. We're going to do our favourite player that was picked in this draft and our least favourite player, and in terms of the fit that they were actually drafted into. So I'll get the ball rolling. My favourite draft pick of this year's draft was Josh Jones to the Arizona Cardinals. Josh Jones was a guy that was getting first round gradings. I loved him, actually, coming out of college. He's a very big guy. And I think he could be the cornerstone, really, of their offensive line looking to the years ahead. And they've got him in the third round. You know, they used their second round pick to get DeAndre Hopkins. And then you add to it the fact that in the third round, they've got a guy that's still a first round talent. I think that the Cardinals had an unbelievable draft, and they've got now the guy that can be, a feature on their offensive line for years to come. And it's another addition that they've made in the third round that's going to actually try and keep Kyler Murray upright and healthy. Now,
agreed.
I think it was a pick that I wouldn't have minded the Seahawks taking. We took Lewis a few picks beforehand, which I love. I absolutely love that pick. But, you know, this was a fit I was sort of screaming for on the night for us, and we didn't go with it. And the Cardinals sort of swooped up on probably one of the better picks of the round again. Now, we spoke about this in a little bit of depth, and I don't want to go into it too much. My least favourite pick of this draft was A.J. Dillon to the Packers. I'm lost for words at the choice. Not only really for them to take Jordan Love, but in taking Jordan Love, that's fine. Okay, you're taking your guy for the future there. You're going to upset people, but it's going to work. So with your second round pick, take a guy that's going to keep your current quarterback happy. If it's an offensive lineman, at least you can say you're investing in keeping it upright. But instead, probably the one position on that offense that I think that was, I wouldn't have even hesitated twice looking at and saying that they needed improvement on. Third guy.
It just doesn't make sense.
It's baffling.
As we previously said, they're one game away from the Super Bowl and they acquire their two first picks.
Yeah, exactly.
With positions of strength. As we say, we've seen the quote that Aaron Rodgers come out and said, where he said, I think one of his, about the GM, he was like, I think one of his kids was sitting at the computer pressing buttons, which says it all.
Yeah. It's going to upset him, isn't it? And I think actually here as well, you mentioned they're one game away from the Super Bowl. When they were one game away from the Super Bowl, what hurt them? Run defense. So even if you took a defensive tackle or you take an inside linebacker, I know they addressed that position in the fifth round with Kamal Martin, but if you actually look at that pick and you say, okay, well, listen, sorry, Aaron, we haven't taken you a wide receiver, but we've got you we've got you that defensive tackle that's going to help us when we play the 49ers again this year in the NFC Championship
get you back on the ball.
Exactly. At least you can justify it. But when you say to him, listen, we've taken A.J. Dillon, who I love. It's not about A.J. Dillon, but we've taken a guy that's going to sit behind Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams. Okay. Well, brilliant, So our first two picks are picks that aren't going to make any difference towards us trying to win a Super Bowl this year. In my eyes, I can't see A.J. Dillon starting games this year. I struggle to see him even taking reps this year, really. So that's my least favourite pick of the draft.
Yeah, I think it's justified.
So I'll start off with my least favourite, which just doesn't make any sense at all, which is coming out of the Chicago Bears, which is Cole Kmet, tight end. What are they doing? They've just signed Jimmy Graham, who has a bit of a traveller. He does get around the NFL teams. I think it's 4 teams in his last 4 years now, something ridiculous. And if we're honest, he's never really reflected what he's done at the Seahawks, but still, you've just paid a tight end who is known throughout the league. And then they had another tight end with their first pick, when they already, at the time of this filming of this podcast, they've got 10 tight ends now on their roster. It just doesn't make sense. As we've said, draft your position of need. We don't know what's going through those GMs' mind, but it just doesn't make sense to me. I think it's a wasted pick, especially when there is a lot of holes on that offense that needs sorting out, and tight end isn't one of them, clearly, if they've got 9 already there before the acquisition of Cole Kemet. Going on to my favourite pick, they had an unbelievable draft. They got their guy in Joe Burrow, but going to go a bit outside the box with Logan Wilson, 3rd round, first pick, linebacker out of Wyoming to the Bengals. He's a tackling machine and a ball hog, which is what I love about him. He's very versatile. Throughout his college career, he got 10 interceptions and over 400 tackles. And in his final year alone, he got 105 overall tackles with 4 interceptions. I think it's a steal in the 3rd round, and I really think he'll be able to play a big part in that defense. They got their quarterback with the first pick of the draft in Joe Burrow, an unbelievable pick. And I think they've got a potential quarterback for their defense in Logan Wilson, someone that we'll keep our eye on for the rest of the season. Josh, your favourite and least favourite pick?
Yes, I'll start my favourite with Cam Akers, pick 52 by the Rams. Todd Gurley obviously moving on to the Falcons in the offseason. I think he's just the perfect fit with Sean McVay and that offense. He's a guy that does a bit of everything when it comes to playing running back. You're not going to kind of miss out on anything from him. And beat Dalvin Cook's rushing record at Florida State. And we've seen what Dalvin Cook can do when he's fit in the league. So I think Cam Akers is just a perfect fit. I won't dwell on it too much because I think we're going to talk about my least favourite quite a lot because we didn't really touch on it. But Jalen Hurts, the next pick, Oklahoma to Eagles, absolutely mind-boggling for a lot of people. I'm sure Twitter had a lot of things to say when it happened. In my opinion, it is a dreadful pick. Carson Wentz is a quarterback I like as a player. He hasn't stayed fit for a whole season. So I guess that kind of supports the option of having a strong backup. But you've just paid the guy ridiculous money, within the last year or so. I think like we've said earlier on, he's not got the best wide receiving team. And, he's pulled them to the playoffs in his career multiple times. He's had an MVP season that he was absolutely snatched from him for no reason, not sure why. But it just doesn't make sense. You're putting pressure on a guy that doesn't need it. And you've also got a quarterback, in my opinion, who deserved the chance to be either sat behind a player like Big Ben, which I would have liked, 1-2 years left on his career. And then, you have Jalen Hurts that can come in and hopefully have learned a little bit and take that role. Alternatively, some people think he could be fighting for a starting job this year. So I'm sure you guys have got plenty to add as well. And I'm sure there's loads I've missed, but yeah.
Well, like we said with the Packers earlier on, I think it just creates more uncertainty in that quarterback room. Jalen Hurts is an unbelievable talent. And I do think he's got a huge ceiling. So I wouldn't say it's an awful pick, but I can understand how it's a least favourite pick because it's not deserved for either Jalen Hurts, who I think should be going for a starting spot or looking for a starting spot the following year in the NFL. And it's unfair on Carson Wentz, who, as you say, with one of the worst wide receiver groups, dragged that team to the playoffs last year. And I think it's undeserved, especially when he's just been paid. If anything, it sends out a mixed message to the fan base and the quarterbacks themselves.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I think would be a really good episode topic for us, actually, where we can discuss a little bit more in depth the Drew Lock and the Jalen Hurts pick. But there's one little thing that I want to add here. Drew Lock, excuse me. Can't even remember the Chavvy's name. Love to the Packers. Now, the one thing that I do really want to touch upon with this pick, and it's something that actually really angered me, is the Eagles GM came out after the draft and said that the reason that they wanted to take Jalen Hurts was in the past, the Seahawks took Wilson before he could draft Wilson in the prior role. Now, that's a really sickening mentality, I think, actually, to why you should draft a player, which is almost resentment in the past that when you were a QB needy team, you couldn't get that guy. If anything, to me, I read into that they're not convinced in Carson Wentz and they feel like they've got the opportunity to get Russell Wilson 2.0. Personally, I don't think that's a great comparison for Hurts. He's athletic. He's very good with his feet. He's good on the run. But I think they're actually two quite different players anyway. But to sort of suggest that the reason that you've actually drafted this guy in the second round, when you could have drafted more players and more pieces to help out Carson Wentz, do a Broncos perhaps and take back-to-back wide receivers because you're a receiver-needy team. You go back to that Love pick. It just feels as though you're drafting someone for the sake of drafting them. And actually, we touched upon him prior, Jake Fromm was there to the 5th round. If you wanted a good backup,
no one would have looked at the Eagles and said, "Why have you taken Jake Fromm?"
Yeah, it would have been a great pick. Even if they'd taken him in the third or the fourth rather than the second.
Honestly, I don't think anyone would have looked at them and said, "That's a really bad pick, what you've just done there." But to take someone like Hurts, who everyone knows is probably good enough to be competing for a starting job, and I think, as you mentioned, has got a very high ceiling for a job in the future in the NFL, unless they're using this for future trade bait or whatever, it's just a baffling pick, a really baffling pick. And I do agree. I think this is something that, with the Love pick as well, we could actually go into in a bit more depth and look at maybe success stories of examples where teams like this have drafted a backup high, and to see what it's done to the team in the future, because I can't imagine this is going to work out well for the Philadelphia Eagles.
No.
I don't know, but it's stockpiling a good quarterback, isn't it? I think one interesting point would be, if I was to say to you both Jalen Hurts and Justin Herbert are both going to be walk-on starters now, in 5 years' time, I wouldn't be surprised if Jalen Hurts was having a better NFL career than Justin Herbert. So are they wise then taking that sort of caliber of quarterback in the second, where the Chargers have had to use their 6th pick of the whole draft to get a similar quarterback? So for value, it doesn't seem like a bad pick, but I think for uncertainty in the team, it's a poor pick.
Yeah, and you know, we went in a little bit of depth with it, I guess, with the Love pick, but it's a win later mentality.
Yeah.
You know, the Eagles, I don't think, are far off of, you know, competing for Super Bowls again. I do think they've got a good squad. They were just injury riddled last year, and I think they needed DB help and they needed wide receiver help, and they could have addressed DB help here, and they didn't. So it's an interesting one. It's a really interesting one, but I think it's definitely a topic we should address in the future. But I think with that in mind, I think this is probably a good place for us to wrap up this week's episode. So first off, we really appreciate everyone that's listened to this and you joining us. In the future,
Cheers,
what we're going to do is we're going to actually whittle down a little bit the episode length. I believe this episode is going to end up being, you know, closer to sort of an hour and 45 minutes or the likes. We're going to be hoping to whittle it down sort of 45 minutes to an hour an episode. We're going to be bringing out little debate sort of size, treat size episodes, as we're going to call them, sort of 20-minute episodes where we're going to pit each other against each other and have a chair, or even all three of us against each other in a debate style format. And we're going to be hoping to release a couple of those a week as well at each point, so that we've got little smaller topics that we're going to bring out. And we'll talk a bit more in depth about those in our next episode also. I will point you towards our social media. On Twitter and Instagram, our handles are @It'sFootballPod. Our Spotify, and later we're going to be uploading these to Apple Music, will all be It's Football, Not Football. Should be able to find us across all platforms. I really appreciate you joining us. I've been Dan Gadsden. I've been joined by Josh Reynolds.
Thank you.
And Ieuan Evans.
Thank you for listening, gang.
And it's been a pleasure, and we look forward to having you join us again soon.